Imagine, imagine living in a house built entirely out of glass.
Yeah, okay.
It's this beautiful, intentionally peaceful design, right?
Hmm.
The architecture itself is basically a statement to your neighbors saying, hey, we have nothing to hide and, we pose no threat.
Right, a totally transparent, peaceful setup.
Exactly. But what happens when the neighborhood suddenly starts getting dangerous?
Well, a glass house isn't going to offer much protection.
Right. But you don't want to just tear the whole house down.
Hmm.
So you start um, quietly replacing those glass panes with reinforced steel, all while trying to maintain the outward appearance of that same peaceful glass house.
Wow, yeah. That's actually a brilliant way to visualize the structural reality of East Asia right now.
Yeah.
Definitely. The architectural blueprint of the entire region is fundamentally changing, and the implications for global security are just, well, they're massive.
So let's look at that neighborhood today. For everyone listening, we are jumping straight into our deep dive.
Right.
And the mission here is to master Japan's unprecedented transition from a traditionally pacifist state
Right.
into this proactive, deterrence-oriented security power in the Indo-Pacific.
Yeah, and we are unpacking the exact cause and effect chains of this shift. No filler, just, ensuring you have the exact facts, the terminology, and the policy measures you need for a comprehensive understanding of the source material.
Exactly. So to understand why Tokyo is essentially retrofitting its constitutional foundation with steel, we have to look at the geographic pressure cooker they're sitting in.
Right, it's not happening in a vacuum.
No, not at all. Based on the sources, there isn't just one issue. It's a converging triple threat.
A very literal triple threat.
Yeah. Let's start with the immediate spark, North Korea.
Okay, yeah.
We all know Pyongyang is relentlessly developing nuclear weapons and ballistic missiles. But what specifically changes the calculus for Japan here?
Well, it's the shift from, theoretical capability to undeniable physical intent.
Okay, meaning what exactly?
Like, you can monitor a country building a weapon, and sure, that's a concern. But the trigger event that shifts this into an immediate crisis is the trajectory of those tests.
Right. They've been firing them right over Japan.
Exactly. Firing ballistic missiles directly over sovereign Japanese territory. And we aren't just talking about rudimentary Scud missiles anymore.
Right.
The sources explicitly point to their development of intercontinental and hypersonic systems.
Let's pause on the hypersonic element for a second because that feels crucial to the why here.
It's the whole ballgame.
Right, because a traditional ballistic missile follows a predictable arc, right?
Right, like a very fast baseball.
Exactly. But hypersonic missiles fly lower, they can maneuver mid-flight, and they travel at at least 5 times the speed of sound?
Yeah, Mach 5 or faster.
Doesn't that basically reduce a nation's reaction time to 0?
Precisely. And that 0 reaction time window, it forces a complete reevaluation of what defense actually means.
Because you can't just wait and see.
Right. If you wait for the missile to cross your border before you react, it's already too late. You can no longer rely on, an invisible diplomatic shield or just assuming an adversary won't actually pull the trigger.
Wow. Which brings us to the much larger systemic powder keg just to the southwest.
China.
Right. If North Korea is the immediate, unpredictable spark, China is the long-term systemic challenge driving this whole strategic shift.
Absolutely.
We're looking at rapid military modernization and this massive naval expansion.
Yeah.
But it's their behavior in the East China Sea that really stands out.
Yes, and for anyone taking notes, we must be incredibly precise about the geography here.
Right, the specific islands.
Exactly. The strategic flashpoint you need to lock onto is the Senkaku, or Diaoyu, Islands.
Senkaku from the Japanese side, Diaoyu from the Chinese side.
Right. And this isn't just broad regional posturing. The sources highlight frequent, highly calculated incursions by Chinese Coast Guard and naval vessels into waters claimed by Japan.
And using the Coast Guard, that's a very specific strategy, isn't it?
Oh, absolutely.
It's that gray zone tactic. Like if China sends a naval destroyer, it's a clear act of military aggression.
Right. An act of war.
But sending a heavily armed Coast Guard vessel, it kind of blurs the line between civilian law enforcement and military action.
That is exactly the mechanism at play. It makes it incredibly difficult for Japan to respond without looking like they are the ones escalating things.
Right, without looking like the aggressor.
Yeah. It is continuous physical pressure on Japan's maritime borders. It's designed to just exhaust Japanese responses and slowly establish a new normal.
And Tokyo's response to this is now completely unambiguous, right?
Totally. Japan's National Security Strategy, the NSS, it officially identifies China as its, quote, greatest strategic challenge.
Greatest strategic challenge.
Yes. That phrasing is not accidental. It is a dramatic departure from decades of, well, careful diplomatic ambiguity.
Okay, so that's two fronts. Let's look at the third front, because this is where the map really starts to look claustrophobic for Tokyo.
Yeah, Russia.
Right, Russia. Historically, the relationship between Japan and Russia has always been complicated by that unresolved dispute over the northern territories.
Which Russia calls the Kuril Islands.
Right, but the sources point to the conflict in Ukraine as this major catalyst for a new level of hostility in the Pacific.
Yeah, it is.
Walk me through that linkage. Why does a war in Eastern Europe change the maritime security dynamic in the Pacific for Japan?
Well, it comes down to geopolitical alignment.
Okay.
When the conflict in Ukraine began, Japan actively aligned with the West, and they implemented sanctions against Moscow.
Right.
In retaliation, Russia didn't just, suspend peace treaty negotiations over the northern territories.
What did they do?
They significantly increased their military deployments and exercises right on Japan's northern doorstep.
Wow. So they essentially militarized the diplomatic dispute.
Yes, but the truly alarming mechanism for Tokyo here is the coordination.
Coordination with who? China.
Exactly. It isn't just that Russian forces are active, it is their joint operations with China. We are seeing Sino-Russian joint bomber patrols and naval exercises near Japanese waters.
Oh, man.
Yeah. When you have two heavily armed, nuclear-capable neighbors coordinating their pressure tactics like that, it fundamentally alters the regional balance of power.
Okay, so if I'm looking at this whole board, Tokyo basically has a three-front problem.
Yeah.
You've got Pyongyang's unpredictable hypersonic missiles flying overhead, Beijing's naval expansion pushing the gray zone at the Senkaku-Diaoyu Islands, and Moscow militarizing the Northern Territories dispute while running joint drills with China.
That is the exact strategic map. You have summarized those converging threat vectors perfectly.
All right, so for you listening, I want to pause for a quick active recall loop. Try to answer this in your head before we move on. Can you name the three distinct threat vectors we just covered?
Take a second.
And specifically, which nation does Japan's NSS label its greatest strategic challenge?
Lock those answers in.
Okay, so because of this tightening geographic noose, that glass house we talked about earlier, it simply cannot survive a storm anymore.
No, it would shatter.
Right. That pacifist orientation is no longer viable.
Oh.
Which leads us to Tokyo's historic policy response, what the sources call Japan's strategic normalization.
Right, strategic normalization.
Let's get into the mechanics of this. We are talking about a massive shift from a constrained defense policy to remilitarization. What are the actual numbers we're looking at here?
Well, the foundational metric driving this normalization is the defense budget. Japan's defense expenditure is being increased towards a target of 2% of its GDP.
Okay, I really want to contextualize that for the listener because 2% doesn't sound like a lot on paper.
Right, it sounds small.
But Japan is currently the fourth largest economy in the world.
Yeah.
Shifting to 2% of GDP basically catapults them to having the third largest defense budget globally, behind only the US and China.
Exactly. It represents a monumental influx of capital into defense hardware, research, and infrastructure.
Right.
And, the 2% figure itself is deeply symbolic. That specific number aligns Japan closely with NATO standards.
Oh, right, because NATO countries aim for 2%.
Right.
Yeah.
Even though Japan isn't in NATO, adopting that standard is a deliberate signal to the international community. It communicates that Japan is abandoning its post-war hesitance and basically pulling its weight in a strategic language that the West fundamentally understands.
But the money is only half the story here. The sources detail the acquisition of what they call counter-strike capabilities.
Yes.
Which means Japan wants the ability to target enemy bases.
Yep.
Now, I have to challenge this because this seems like a massive contradiction to me.
How so?
Well, Japan's constitution, specifically Article 9, it famously renounces war and the maintenance of military forces with war potential, right?
Yes, it does.
So if you are strictly pacifist, isn't acquiring counter-strike missiles like a neighborhood watch suddenly buying sniper rifles and flashbangs?
That is a great analogy.
How is the Japanese government legally bypassing their own constitution to do this without, a public referendum?
That is the defining legal dilemma of modern Japan. To use an analogy, they are not rewriting the core operating system, right? The Constitution remains.
Okay.
Instead, the cabinet is applying a massive software patch to deal with modern malware. They are officially reinterpreting the Constitution.
A software patch. Okay, so how does this patch work legally speaking?
So the Constitution allows for the minimum necessary force required for self-defense.
Okay.
For decades, that meant you could only shoot down a missile once it was in the air, headed toward you.
Right, pure defense.
Exactly. But the government's new legal interpretation argues that in an era of hypersonic technology where reaction times are practically zero waiting for the launch is essentially a death sentence.
Right, we talked about that.
Therefore, the scope of what constitutes self-defense has to be broadened.
Oh, I see. So if an adversary is, say, fueling a missile on a launch pad and intelligence confirms it is aimed at Tokyo,
Yeah.
striking that launch pad preemptively is now classified as a defensive act.
Precisely. It is a reinterpretation driven by sheer technological necessity. It allows them to maintain credible deterrence.
Wow.
However, it requires an incredibly delicate domestic balancing act. The pacifist identity in Japan is still culturally profound.
Right. The public isn't just going to accept warmongering.
Exactly. The government has to constantly reassure the public that these counterstrike capabilities are strictly for deterrence, not preemptive aggression.
It's a very fine legal line to walk.
Very fine.
Now, this shift isn't just about buying Tomahawk missiles, right? The blueprint for all of this is the updated National Security Strategy, or NSS.
Yes, the NSS.
And the sources emphasize that the NSS takes a comprehensive security approach. It integrates military, economic, and technological dimensions.
That's right.
Explain the economic and technological side of this for us, because that seems just as critical as the hardware.
It might actually be more critical. The NSS recognizes that modern warfare rarely starts with bullets anymore.
What does it start with?
It starts with supply chains. If an adversary can cut off your access to rare earth elements or choke your maritime trade routes or jam your satellite communications, well, your military hardware is useless.
Right, you can't even turn it on.
Exactly. Therefore, economic security is now treated as national security.
So this means actively securing supply chains, protecting critical technologies from corporate espionage, and, building resilience in the cyber and space domains.
Yes, it is really all about mitigating technology dependence on adversarial nations.
Because if your entire manufacturing sector relies on a geopolitical rival for critical components,
Then you have zero strategic autonomy. You are effectively hostage to their economic leverage.
Okay, let me pause and consolidate this policy shift to make sure the framework is crystal clear for you listening.
Good idea.
So, if you're answering an exam question on Japan's evolving defense posture, here is your framework.
Get your pens ready.
The intro should highlight the deteriorating regional environment. Then the body covers the responses, which are defined by strategic normalization. Right. That entails hitting the 2% GDP defense spending target to meet NATO standards, implementing that legal software patch to acquire counterstrike capabilities,
Yep.
and adopting an NSS focused heavily on comprehensive security and supply chain resilience.
And crucially for your conclusion, you need to mention that while Japan is building its own capabilities, the NSS explicitly states the U.S. alliance remains the absolute cornerstone of its defense.
Right, the U.S. is still key.
Always. But it also mandates expanding partnerships with other like-minded countries, specifically singling out Australia and India.
And underlying those key words:
Right.
counterstrike capabilities, strategic normalization, 2% GDP, Senkaku, and comprehensive security.
Perfect.
Which naturally brings us to the broader geopolitical ripples. Japan doesn't exist in a vacuum, right?
No, definitely not.
A legal reinterpretation in Tokyo fundamentally alters the architecture of the entire Indo-Pacific. When the NSS singles out the U.S., Australia, and India, it immediately points to the QAD.
Absolutely. We are seeing the QAD evolve from, a basic diplomatic dialogue into a much more robust, integrated security network.
Right. Geopolitically, Japan's strategic normalization basically acts as the load-bearing pillar for this emerging Indo-Pacific security architecture.
Yes. A proactive Japan provides the mass and the technological capability required to actually counterbalance Chinese naval expansion.
Let's drill down into India's strategic convergence with Japan, because the economic and security alignment here is fascinating.
It really is.
We talked about Japan's NSS focusing heavily on supply chain resilience and mitigating technology dependence on China. How does that directly impact India?
Well, it creates a perfect symbiotic relationship.
Okay, how so?
Think about India's overarching economic objective right now, Atmanirbhar Bharat, or self-reliance.
Right.
India is pushing to become a global manufacturing hub and achieve true strategic autonomy. But to do that, they need massive foreign direct investment, advanced technology transfers, and integration into global supply chains that aren't dominated by Beijing.
Oh, wow. And Japan has the capital, the advanced technology, and a desperate, legally mandated need to move its supply chains out of hostile territory.
Precisely. Japan's push for economic security directly fuels India's push for Atmanirbhar Bharat.
That is a massive connection.
It is. Whether it's semiconductor manufacturing, defense hardware collaboration, or securing rare earth supply chains, neither nation wants to be completely dependent on a strategic rival. By linking their economies, they diversify their risk.
So the technology exchange and economic integration serve a dual purpose here.
Exactly.
It boosts their domestic economies while simultaneously reinforcing multipolarity in the Indo-Pacific. They are actively ensuring that no single hegemon can dictate the terms of trade and security in the region.
That is the core of their strategic convergence. But, we have to address the inherent danger in all of this. The sources point out a very serious dilemma regarding Japan's remilitarization.
Right. It's the classic security dilemma, isn't it?
It is.
By building up your military to secure yourself, you inherently make your neighbors feel less secure, which prompts them to build up their militaries in response.
Exactly.
Doesn't Japan's defense spending surge and acquisition of counterstrike capabilities risk sparking a massive arms race in East Asia?
It is a profound risk, and one that Tokyo is acutely aware of.
So how do they manage it?
It is why the diplomatic signaling is just as important as the missile procurement. By emphasizing the defensive nature of the constitutional reinterpretation, by anchoring their policy to the U.S. alliance, and by framing their actions within the context of international law and maritime security, Japan is trying to maximize deterrence without crossing the threshold into provocation.
Wow, it's a razor's edge.
It really is.
You are trying to build a military powerful enough to deter China and North Korea,
Yeah.
but constrained enough not to trigger a preemptive conflict.
Exactly. And this is why understanding the institutional mechanics, the how and the why of Japan's internal legal shifts is so critical for anyone listening who is studying international relations or global geopolitics.
Yeah. When Tokyo redefines the legal parameters of self-defense, it directly strengthens India's maritime posture in the Indian Ocean. It shifts the flow of billions of dollars in technology supply chains. The cause and effect chain spans the entire continent.
It really does.
Okay, let's do another rapid revision recap for the listener.
Let's lock this in.
Answer these as I ask them. What is the target percentage of GDP for Japan's new defense spending?
Think about the NATO standard.
What are the two disputed island chains mentioned, and which countries are they disputed with?
Geography is key here.
And finally, what specific capability allows Japan to target enemy bases?
And remember the constitutional software patch.
Awesome. We'll pull all these threads together to make sure the entire picture is totally locked in. We started with the geographic triggers.
Right.
You have the immediate threat of North Korean hypersonic missiles erasing reaction times. You have the systemic long-term challenge of China utilizing gray zone tactics and naval expansion around the Senkaku or Diaoyu Islands.
Yep.
And you have the geopolitical complication of Russia militarizing the Northern Territories dispute and coordinating with Beijing.
Which triggered the institutional response.
Right.
The realization that traditional pacifism was obsolete led to strategic normalization.
Yeah.
This means the defense budget surging toward 2% of GDP, the cabinet executing a legal reinterpretation of the Constitution to allow for counterstrike capabilities.
And the deployment of a comprehensive national security strategy.
Exactly.
And then the global impact. That comprehensive strategy heavily prioritizes economic security and supply chain resilience, which creates a massive strategic convergence with India's Atmanirbhar Bharat initiatives.
Yes.
Ultimately, Japan's internal transformation acts as the catalyst for a more robust QOD and a multipolar Indo-Pacific security architecture.
That is the complete cause and effect chain right there, from a local territorial dispute all the way to the restructuring of global technology supply chains.
Which brings me back to where we started, that glass house slowly being reinforced with steel.
Yeah.
The architecture of peace is being entirely redesigned for an era of active deterrence. And I want to leave you with a final provocative thought to mull over.
Let's hear it.
If Japan successfully normalizes its military posture, building the third largest defense budget in the world and deploying long-range counterstrike capabilities, all while technically retaining its famous pacifist constitution.
Right.
How will this unprecedented legal balancing act permanently redefine the international standard for what self-defense actually means in the 21st century?
Wow. It suggests we are moving toward a reality where the definition of peace is no longer the absence of weapons, but the highly credible, technologically advanced promise to use them if crossed.
A fascinating, if slightly unsettling reality.
Definitely.
Keep questioning the underlying logic of these geopolitical shifts. Keep looking for those cause and effect linkages, and we will catch you on the next deep dive.